Welcome. We are about to begin a very intensive and structured analysis of a figure whose actions really did change the global security landscape forever.
Mm.
I'm talking about Osama bin Mohammed bin Owad bin Laden, the founder of al-Qaeda.
Right.
Our goal today is to synthesize a pretty comprehensive set of sources, looking at the specific chronology of his life, his ideological evolution, his militant career, and then, of course, that decade-long international effort that led to his death.
And this is, a challenging but really necessary exploration. We're trying to treat this not as just a story, but as an examination of the specific levers, political, financial, theological, people that are detailed in the sources that, that really powered his global impact.
Absolutely.
And before we get into the timeline, I think it's just imperative that we formally acknowledge the immense human cost of his actions.
Yes.
Particularly for the nearly 3,000 people who lost their lives on September 11th alone. Our objective here is purely factual, is to understand the trajectory of this critical figure.
And what's so striking about the material is that the starting point, it completely belies the figure he would become. When you picture a global militant, you don't really picture someone born into just staggering wealth and privilege.
No, you don't. And that is the essential paradox of his early life. Osama bin Laden was born on March 10th, 1957, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
And his father, Mohammed bin Laden, he wasn't just wealthy, he was a pillar of the establishment.
A central figure. He was a Yemeni-born construction magnate who rose to become a billionaire. And critically, he had these extremely close ties to the Saudi royal family.
Which put the family where, exactly, in the social hierarchy?
Right at the top. High within the country's aristocracy.
Let's talk about the scale of that wealth, because it's so foundational to everything that comes later.
It gave him a level of autonomy that's just unprecedented. The family's construction empire was estimated to be worth around $5 billion.
$5 billion?
Yes. Now, his mother, Hamida Alatas, was Syrian. She was Mohammed bin Laden's 10th wife. That marriage was brief, and his father divorced her shortly after Osama was born, but he was raised in a large household.
And then the key financial event happens when he's still a boy.
Exactly. In 1967, his father dies in a plane crash. Yeah. And when that huge estate was finally settled, Osama bin Laden inherited a substantial portion. The estimates are somewhere between $25 and $30 million.
In the late 70s and early 80s, $30 million is. It's not just pocket money, it's operational capital.
It is. It meant he didn't need state sponsors. He didn't need to turn to criminal activity to fund his early ideological projects.
He could just buy his own bulldozers.
He could buy his own bulldozers, pay for logistics, set up his own camps. It was a luxury most emerging militant leaders just don't have. That autonomy is vital to understanding his independence later on.
So what about his education? I assume it was the standard path for a son of his status.
It was. He attended the elite Al-Thagir Model School from 68 to 76. Then he enrolled at King Abdulaziz University, officially studying economics and business administration.
Officially?
Right, because the sources aren't actually unified on whether he finished. Some reports suggest he earned degrees in civil engineering or public administration, but other accounts say he left after just 3 years without completing his studies.
And that dichotomy continues into his personal life too, doesn't it? We have this image of the hardened fugitive, but his early interests were surprisingly normal.
Domesticated, even. It paints a really complex picture. The sources say he enjoyed writing poetry. His reading list included military history, people like Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery and Charles de Gaulle.
So military strategy was an early interest?
It seems so. He was also a keen football player, Songer. He played center forward and apparently followed the English club Arsenal. Physically, the FBI later described him as exceptionally tall and lean, somewhere between 6'4" and 6'6". And for all his later reputation, he was often described as being soft-spoken, even mild-mannered.
What about his family life? Before the militancy, he started a family very young.
He did. 1974, at just 17, he married his first cousin, Najwa Ghanem. She was the first of 5 known wives.
5.
And he went on to father 24 children. Accounts from a bodyguard paint him as a frugal man, not one for luxury despite his wealth, and a strict father. He enjoys simple things, like family picnics in the desert.
There's a detail about his first wife, Najwa, that's always stood out.
Yes, that she left Afghanistan just 2 days before the September 11th attacks. This is a specific detail that always prompts a lot of speculation about whether there was internal knowledge or a calculated escape.
So you have this backdrop of wealth, business studies, a big family. Where did the switch flip? Where did that radical ideological core actually form?
It really began during his time at university. While he was, officially studying business, his main interest became religion,
Okay.
specifically interpreting the Quran and doing charitable work.
Yeah.
But the pivotal influence came when he became a pupil of the Islamist scholar Abdullah Yusuf Azam.
Right.
Bin Laden avidly read Azam, but he was maybe even more profoundly influenced by the revolutionary writings of an Egyptian intellectual named Sayyid Qutb.
And Qutb's ideas form the basis of, well, what we call Qutbism.
Exactly. And that is the intellectual engine of al-Qaeda.
So let's unpack that. What did Qutbism give him that traditional Islamic thought didn't?
Qutbism radically reinterprets the concept of jahiliyyah.
Which is the state of pre-Islamic ignorance.
Right. Qutb argued that modern secular Muslim governments, like in Saudi Arabia or Egypt, were living in a new state of jahiliyyah because they didn't rule strictly by Sharia law.
And that made them
Apostates. And crucially, legitimate targets for revolutionary violence by true believers.
So his core political belief, coming straight from Qutb, was the immediate total restoration of Sharia law, not just in Saudi Arabia, but everywhere.
That's the end goal. He violently rejected any other system, secular government, democracy, socialism. Theologically, he was rooted in the Authority school, which is a very literalist approach to Islamic texts.
There's also a key psychological element here, according to a former CIA analyst.
Michael Scheuer, yes. His analysis was that bin Laden was genuinely motivated by the belief that U.S. foreign policy was actively oppressing and harming Muslims across the Middle East.
That's the famous line, isn't it? They hate us for what we do, not who we are.
That's Scheuer's synthesis of it, yes. A focus on geopolitical action. But bin Laden's own critique went much further than that. He was attacking the entire Western way of life.
How so?
In a 2002 letter, he specifically criticized the secular nature of U.S. government. He urged Americans to convert to Islam and to reject what he called immoral acts.
He listed them, didn't he?
He did. Fornication, homosexuality, intoxicants, gambling, usury. It shows his crusade wasn't just about troop deployments. It was a total rejection of Western culture as fundamentally un-Islamic and corrosive.
In this radical framework, it found the perfect outlet in 1979.
The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. It galvanized the entire Arab world, and for bin Laden, it was the perfect cause. It allowed him to put his ideology and his money into action.
So he goes to Pakistan?
He travels to Pakistan, joins his mentor Azam. He said he felt outraged that an injustice had been committed against the people of Afghanistan, and he starts using his inheritance, his business knowledge, and notably his own construction machinery.
The bulldozers again?
The bulldozers, the dump trucks, all of it. He starts supporting the Afghan Mujahideen resistance.
Now, the sources are very specific about his relationship with the CIA during this time. There's a persistent myth that he was a direct CIA asset.
And the sources are absolutely clear in debunking that. Bin Laden did not receive any direct funding or training from the U.S.
So where did all the U.S. money go?
The U.S. aid, which was immense, between $6 and $12 billion, was channeled strictly through Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence, the ISI.
Okay.
The training was handled by the Pakistani Armed Forces and the ISI. CIA officials cited in the material confirmed their personnel were restricted to the embassy in Islamabad. They never entered Afghanistan or met with Arab leaders like bin Laden.
So his role initially was what? Purely logistical.
Purely logistical. He was the great enabler for the Arab fighters coming in. In 1984, he co-founded an organization with Azam called Maktab al-Khidamat.
The services office.
Exactly. It used bin Laden's money to manage the entire infrastructure for Arab volunteers. Air tickets, housing, paperwork, setting up camps in Pakistan.
But he clearly had ambitions beyond being a travel agent for jihad. When did he make the jump from logistics to the battlefield?
That happened between 1986 and 87. He started setting up his own dedicated base in eastern Afghanistan for his own fighters. And then he participated directly in combat. The sources all point to the Battle of Jaji in 1987 as the key turning point.
Even though the battle itself wasn't strategically that important.
Right. It wasn't about military significance. It was about the media coverage. He came out of that fight, and the mainstream Arab press just lionized him.
So it made him a hero.
It transformed him. He went from being a rich donor to a celebrated mujahid. He was idolized across the Arab world. And that media heroism fundamentally changed his own vision for what his role would be after the Soviets left.
And that hero status leads directly to the creation of al-Qaeda.
It does. After the Soviets withdrew in '89, he went back to Saudi Arabia as a war hero.
Hmm.
But he'd already split from Makkab al-Qidamah in '88,
Oh, the split.
a difference in vision. His mentor, Azam, wanted the Arab fighters to integrate with local Afghan groups. Bin Laden wanted something else. He wanted a highly military structured organization that was focused on worldwide action.
How was al-Qaeda actually conceived in those early meetings?
Well, we have notes from a meeting in August 1988. They outline the purpose as an organized Islamic faction. Its goal is to lift the word of God, to make his religion victorious. And crucially, members had to pledge obedience or bayat to their superiors.
And the power structure came from a very specific merger.
A fusion, really. It was the unification of bin Laden's independent inherited money with the proven expertise of leaders from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, or EIJ. That meant al-Qaeda had both limitless funding and a core of experienced, skilled commanders right from the start.
So the organization is ready for global action, but the event that focuses its anger, that turns its attention to the U.S. and the Saudi monarchy, is the Gulf War.
The Gulf War crisis in August 1990 was the singular defining rupture in his life. Iraq invades Kuwait. The Saudi monarchy feels incredibly vulnerable.
And bin Laden sees his chance.
He immediately goes to King Fahd and offers his entire Arab legion, his veteran fighters from Afghanistan, to defend the kingdom. He pleads with them not to rely on help from the U.S. from non-Muslims.
An offer they rejected.
They rejected it outright. The stakes were too high for the monarchy, so instead of accepting bin Laden's untested fighters, they invited U.S. forces. The 82nd Airborne Division landed just 400 miles from Medina.
For bin Laden, this must have felt like the ultimate betrayal. It confirmed every Qutbist critique he held.
It was an unforgivable ideological sin in his eyes. He publicly and ferociously denounced the monarchy for using unbelievers to defend the Holy Land. He saw it as this: unprecedented indignity.
And he didn't stay quiet about it.
No. He tried to get the religious scholars, the ulama, to issue a fatwa condemning it, but they refused. His constant public criticism led the Saudis to place him under house arrest, and by 1991 he was formally expelled from the country.
So his primary enemy shifts. It goes from the far enemy, the Soviets, to the near enemy, the Saudi monarchy, and its protector, the United States.
That's the fundamental shift. And now he's an ideological fugitive. He enters this new phase as a truly global operative.
First stop, Sudan.
He went to Afghanistan briefly, but by 1992 he and his followers had set up a more stable base in Khartoum, Sudan. And again, he used his construction business, moving machinery from Afghanistan, investing in local infrastructure and agriculture. He even cultivated local support by being very generous to the poor.
But even in exile, the Saudis were trying to cut him off financially.
They were. In 1994, King Fahd stripped him of his Saudi citizenship and, more importantly, pressured his family to cut off his $7 million annual stipend.
A direct attack on the source of his autonomy.
Exactly. And at the same time, U.S. interest in him intensified dramatically.
This is when the U.S. really starts tracking him seriously.
It is. The CIA created a new unit in January '96, codenamed Alex Station, specifically to track him. They monitored his compound in Sudan. The sources even detail how a CIA officer named Billy Waugh located him and prepared an operation to capture him.
But the operation was denied. Why?
Because critically at that point, there was no outstanding U.S. indictment against bin Laden for a capital crime. He was known, he was watched, but he was legally untouchable by the U.S. at that moment.
So the pressure on Sudan just kept building.
Intense pressure. From the U.S., Saudi Arabia, Egypt. Eventually, Sudan let him go. He chose to return to Jalalabad, Afghanistan in May 1996, where he forged a very close alliance with the Taliban leader, Mullah Omar.
But this move came at a huge material cost to him.
It was economically devastating. The sources estimate he lost between $20 million and $300 million in assets, businesses, equipment, all seized by the Sudanese government.
That's an incredible figure.
It is. And the personal sacrifice it implies, giving up the last of his material wealth for the life of a fugitive. It just underscores the singular nature of his ideological commitment. He was now a full-time radical, focused entirely on global confrontation.
And he immediately codifies this with his declarations of war.
The first major one came in August 1996, a fatwa called the Declaration of War against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places.
And his justifications were very specific.
Very. He cited the continued presence of U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia, U.S. support for Israel, and the sanctions on Iraq, which he claimed had killed 600,000 Iraqi children.
So he was explicitly making the targeting of Americans a religious duty.
Undeniably, he stated, quote, terrorizing you is a legitimate and morally demanded duty. But he didn't stop there. 2 years later, in February 1998, he and his deputy Ayman al-Zawahiri issued a second, even broader fatwa.
The World Islamic Front for Jihad against the Jews and the Crusaders?
Right. And this one elevated the call for jihad from a specific defensive action to a global individual obligation for every single Muslim.
And he made a chillingly direct threat at the time.
He did. He told journalists that North Americans were very easy targets and that they would see the results of this in a very short time.
And the late 90s saw that threat become a reality.
Al-Qaeda's activity ramped up significantly. Bin Laden was alleged to have funded the Luxor massacre in Egypt in '97, which killed 62 civilians. Operationally, they were using Ariana Afghan Airlines as a kind of terrorist taxi service.
Ferrying militants, weapons, cash.
Militants, arms, cash, even opium. The notorious arms smuggler Victor Bout was reportedly involved in maintaining the planes.
And the culmination of this was the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings.
The simultaneous truck bombings on August 7, 1998 in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. That was al-Qaeda's debut on the world stage as a mass casualty organization. It killed hundreds of civilians.
What was the immediate U.S. response?
President Clinton ordered Operation Infinite Reach, a series of cruise missile strikes on targets in Sudan and Afghanistan. The strike near coast Afghanistan was reportedly agonizingly close. It missed bin Laden by just a few hours.
And this leads to his official designation as an international criminal.
It does. Though interestingly, Libya actually issued the first Interpol warrant against him in March of '98. The U.S. followed in June 1999, putting him on the FBI's 10 most wanted list.
The UN designated al-Qaeda a terrorist group.
October 1999. But the Taliban, citing their relationship and ideology, still refused to extradite him. They argued non-Muslim courts had no standing to try a Muslim.
This intense prelude brings us to the event that defines him, September 11th, 2001. And the source material is clear that there was intelligence about his intentions beforehand.
Chillingly specific intelligence. We know President Bush received a report on August 6, 2001, titled starkly, Bin Laden determined to strike in U.S.
Let's just quickly recall the events of that day.
On the morning of September 11th, 4 commercial planes were used as missiles. 2 hit the World Trade Center towers, which then collapsed, killing at least 2,750 people. 1 hit the Pentagon.
And the 4th, United 93.
Crashed in Pennsylvania after the passengers heroically intervened, preventing it from reaching its target, which was likely the U.S. Capitol or the White House.
The U.S. government reaction was immediate.
Absolutely. Within hours, the NSA had intercepted communications pointing directly to bin Laden. President Bush wrote in his diary that night, "The Pearl Harbor of the 21st century took place today. We think it's Osama bin Laden." The evidence was clear and irrefutable.
So let's unpack the rationale he later gave, specifically for targeting civilians and destroying the towers.
In a 2004 video, he gave his inspiration. He said he was prompted to do it after seeing the destruction of towers in Lebanon by Israel back in the 1982 war. His stated goal was to punish the U.S. so it could taste some of what we are tasting.
A kind of theological retribution.
Yes. And that connects directly to how he justified targeting civilians who are technically non-combatants.
His justification rested on the idea of a democracy.
Entirely. He asserted that since the U.S. is a democracy, every citizen bears responsibility for the government's actions by voting and paying taxes. Therefore, he concluded, American civilians were legitimate targets for retaliation.
But he didn't immediately claim responsibility, did he?
No. Initially, he denied it. On September 16th, he read a statement on Al Jazeera denying any involvement. But then, U.S. forces found a videotape in Jalalabad in November.
Right, the so-called confession tape.
And it showed him discussing the attack with clear foreknowledge. He finally abandoned the denials in that 2004 video, where he explicitly claimed personal responsibility for directing the 19 hijackers.
The attack immediately launches the war on terror and this decade-long manhunt.
Yes. The U.S. offered a $25 million reward. The CIA's Special Activities Division was assigned the lead role in the search.
And early on, they thought they had him cornered.
Late 2001, during the Battle of Tora Bora, intelligence was conclusive that he was hiding in the mountain caves there.
And this is widely cited as the gravest failure of the whole manhunt.
The sources are blunt about it. The failure to commit enough U.S. ground troops to search that complex network of caves and tunnels allowed him to slip across the border into Pakistan. It's seen as the moment he got away.
And after that,
Yeah.
he essentially vanished.
For years, he was a phantom. Speculation was intense, but as late as 2009, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates admitted publicly that the U.S. had had no reliable information on his whereabouts for years. The focus became hunting his couriers.
So for nearly a decade, he's in hiding, but still the head of this global movement. Did the materials found after his death reveal anything about his strategy during that time?
Yes. This is where the Abbottabad papers become so fascinating. They provide this incredible window into his strategic thinking around 2010. And by then, he was deeply concerned, not about the U.S., but about al-Qaeda's own self-inflicted damage.
He was worried about its image in the Muslim world.
Exactly. He was concerned about the indiscriminate killing of the very population they claimed to be liberating.
So he was chastising his own affiliates.
In a 2010 letter, he directly calls out groups like the Pakistani Taliban for their routine massacres of Muslim civilians. He saw that this was alienating the broader population and undercutting their political goals.
So this crisis of legitimacy led him to call for a major theological review,
A review of a specific Islamic legal concept called al-Tatarus.
which deals with the killing of non-combatants in warfare.
Right. Historically, it deals with the necessity of killing non-combatants, say, if they're used as human shields, to achieve a military goal. Bin Laden felt his affiliates were using it as a blanket excuse for mass murder,
So he wanted to develop a new jihadist code of conduct.
a stringent one, specifically to constrain military operations and avoid Muslim civilian casualties. He knew the killings were counterproductive.
It's just incredible. The founder of al-Qaeda, whose most famous attack was the largest deliberate targeting of civilians in history, is now trying to rein in his movement's violence because it's politically unviable.
It shows the pragmatism of a leader facing, political extinction. And it wasn't just theology. He was giving practical advice.
Like what?
He advised allies in Somalia, al-Shabaab, to focus on economic development, not just endless war. He told followers to focus on slow persuasion, rather than bloody confrontations with other Islamic parties. The whole shift shows a leadership that was profoundly struggling.
And all of this was happening while he was hiding in a location that it defied a decade of intelligence assumptions.
Completely. The idea he was in some remote cave was wrong. In April 2011, U.S. intelligence finally traced him to a fortified three-story compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
And the location was unbelievable.
It was 100 miles from the Afghan border and, critically, less than a mile from the Pakistan Military Academy, their version of West Point.
Which immediately raised deep, deep questions about Pakistani complicity.
It did. Satellite imagery showed the compound was built between 2001 and 2005. He'd lived there for at least 5 years, completely off the grid, no internet, no phone. The high walls, the barbed wire,
Yeah.
It screamed isolation.
And that discovery led directly to Operation Neptune Spear.
Ordered by President Obama and executed on May 2, 2011, by a Navy SEALs unit from DVGRU with CIA support. Bin Laden was killed by gunshot wounds to the head and chest.
But there are conflicting accounts of his final moments.
There are. The sources note distinct disagreements among the SEALs about who fired the fatal shots. Some accounts credit Robert O'Neill. Another, by Matt Bissonnette, describes a different sequence of events. What's unified is that he died from gunshot wounds. The exact tactical sequence, though, remains fractured.
And what happened to his body after the raid?
It was taken to Afghanistan for formal identification, DNA testing. Then, supposedly in accordance with Islamic law requiring burial within 24 hours, his body was reportedly buried at sea from the USS Carl Vinson.
And that claim was later scrutinized.
It was. Some reports questioned it, citing the lack of evidence that an imam was even on board the ship, which complicated the official narrative.
We have to come back to the location of that compound. How did the sources address the massive contradiction of him living next to a military academy?
It fueled what one columnist called deeply improbable speculation. Officially, both the U.S. and Pakistani governments denied any senior officials knew he was there, but that denial is hard to square with later reports.
What were the key allegations?
One report alleged the ISI Director General, Ahmad Shuja Pasha, knew he was there since 2006. An investigative reporter claimed bin Laden was essentially a prisoner of the ISI and that Pasha knew about the U.S. mission in advance.
There was also a claim about a paid informant.
Yes, a specific claim that the CIA learned his location from a former Pakistani intelligence official who was paid the $25 million reward. These are all explosive claims, and they were all officially denied by both countries, leaving this unresolved conflict in historical record.
But the documents captured in the raid, the Abbottabad papers, do they suggest he was protected by the ISI?
Interestingly, no. They complicate that narrative. The papers generally show that bin Laden was deeply wary of any contact with Pakistani intelligence or police
Why?
because of Pakistan's track record. They had arrested other high-profile al-Qaeda members like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. This suggests his support network was probably highly compartmentalized, not something sanctioned from the highest levels of government.
Finally, how do the sources describe his legacy, the global reception after his death?
In the West, his image is universally that of a mass murderer. The New York Times called him the North Star of global terrorism. In the Muslim world, it's more volatile. His popularity peaked during the Iraq War, but it had declined sharply by 2011.
How sharply?
Pew Research noted that support for him was as low as 1% in Lebanon at the time of his death. He was seen as discredited across much of the region.
And yet we've seen some posthumous support from some pretty high-level figures.
That's a crucial detail. In June 2020, the Pakistani Prime Minister, Imran Khan, referred to him as a shaheed, a martyr, which sparked huge international controversy. But most global leaders condemned him. The president of Peru famously called him demonic. It just illustrates the stark divide in how he's assessed.
That brings us to the end of a very comprehensive, structured analysis of his life.
It does. And the synthesized knowledge really reveals a trajectory defined by this collision. His inherited wealth and privileged education colliding with a singular, radical, Qutbist-influenced ideology. A commitment that took him from being a hero in Afghanistan to launching a global war against the U.S., which ended for him in this improbable, isolated compound.
And as we conclude, it's worth reflecting on that profound strategic conflict revealed in those internal al-Qaeda documents. The fact that the leadership was trying to dial back the indiscriminate killing of Muslims late in his life. It was a shift forced by the political failure of alienating their own base. It suggests a critical vulnerability. What might this attempted strategic shift, this forced evolution, suggest about the long-term viability of any ideology that relies so fundamentally on terror and indiscriminate killing? That's a serious question to consider.
It is.
Thank you for joining us for this extensive analysis.
It was vital to present this material with the detail and context it requires.
Thanks for listening.